A Halloween Wraith by William Black. The vast bulk of Ben Cleverig was dark in shadow, but the wide waters of Loch Naver shone a soft silver grey in the moonlight, as Hector McIntyre, keeper and forester in the far solitudes of Glengorm, came striding along the road toward Invermoodal. As he approached the little hamlet, which consists merely of the inn and its surroundings, and one or two capers' cottages, certain small points of red told him of its whereabouts among the black trees, and as he drew still nearer, he thought he would let the good people there know of his coming. Hector had brought his pipes with him, for there were to be great doings on this Halloween night, and now, when he had inflated the bag and tuned the drones, there sprang into the profound silence reigning everywhere around this wild skirl of the hills of Glenorchy. Surely the sound would reach and carry its message. If not, here was Gilead Rover, played still more bravely, and again the proud strains of the Glen's Mine, by which time he had got near to the inn, and was about to turn down from the highway by the semicircular drive passing the front door. But here he suddenly encountered a fearful sight. From out of the dusk of the wall surrounding the front garden, there came three luminous objects, three globes of a dull saffron hue, and on each of these appeared the features of a face, eyes, mouth, and nose, all flaming in fire. On beholding this terrible thing, the tall, brown-bearded forester turned and fled, and the pipes told of his dismay, for they shrieked and groaned and made all sorts of indescribable noises, as if they too were in mortal alarm. Then Mrs. Murray's three children, with victorious shouts of laughter, pursued the tall forester, and kept waving before them the hollowed-out turnips, with a bit of candle burning within. When he had got up to the corner of the road, Hector turned and addressed the children, who had come crowding around him, holding up their flaming turnips to cause him still further dismay. "Well now," said he, in the Gaelic, "there is a fearful thing to alarm any poor person with. Were you not thinking I should die of fright? And the pipes squealing as well, for they never saw anything like that before. But never mind, we are going down to the house now, and do you know, Roland and Isabel, and you, little Shayna, do you know, I have brought you some of the fir tops that grow in Glengorm. For it is a wonderful place, Glengorm, and the fir tops that grow on the larches there are not as the fir tops that grow anywhere else. They are very small, and they are round, and some are pink, and some are blue, and some are black and white, and some others, why, they have an almond inside them. Oh, it is a wonderful place, Glengorm. But it is not always you can get the fir tops from the larches. It is only on some great occasion like the Halloween night. And let me say now, if I put any of them in my pocket, here, Ronald, take the pipes from me, and hold them properly on your shoulder, for one day you will be playing Miss Ramsay Strathspey as well as any one, and I will search my pockets and say if I put any of those wonderful fir tops into them." The children knew very well what all this preamble meant, but neither they nor their elders could have told how it was that Hector McIntyre, every time he came to Invermoodal, brought with him packages of sweetmeats, though he lived in one of the most inaccessible districts in Sutherland, Glengorm being about 22 miles away from anywhere. However, here was a precious little parcels, and when they had been distributed, Hector took his pipes again, and escorted by his small friends, went down to the inn. Well, Mr. Murray, the innkeeper, had also heard the distant skirl of the pipes, and here he was at the door. "How are you, Hector?" he asked in Gaelic. "What is your news?" "There is not much news in Glengorm," was the answer. "And when is your wedding to be?" Mr. Murray said. "We will make a grand day of that, Hector. And I have been thinking I will get some of the lads to kindle a bonfire on the top of Ben Cleverig, a fire that they will see down in Rossshire. And there's many a pistol and many a gun will make a crack when you drive up to this door and bring your bride in, for I am one who believes in the old customs, and whether it is a wedding or the New Year or Halloween night, I am for the old ways, and the Free Church ministers can say what they like. Now come away, and Hector, my lad, and take a dram after your long walk. There is plenty of hard work before you this evening, for Johnny has broken his fiddle, and the lasses have not been asked to dance up a reel for many a day." And then he paused and said, "And how is Flora Campbell, Hector? Have you any news of her?" "No," said the forester, in something of an undertone, and his face looked troubled. "I have had no letter for a while back, and I do not know what it means. Her sister that lives in Greenock has taken ill, and Flora said she must go down from Oban to see her, and that is the last I have heard. If I knew her sister's address in Greenock, I would write and ask Flora why there was no letter so long. But if you send a letter to one called Mary Campbell in such a big place as Greenock, what use is it?" "But no news is good news, Hector," said Mr. Murray cheerfully. And therewith he led the way through a stone corridor into the great kitchen, where a considerable assemblage of lads and lasses were engaged in noisy merriment and pastime. The arrival of the tall forester and his pipes were hailed with general satisfaction, but there was no call as yet for the inspiring music. In fact, this big kitchen was given over to the games of the children and the younger boys and girls, a barn having been prepared for supper, and for the celebration of occult Halloween rites, when the time came for their elders to take part in the festivities. At present, there was a large tub filled with water placed in the middle of the floor, and there were apples in it, and the youngsters, with their hands behind their backs, were trying to snatch out an apple with their teeth. There was many a sousing of heads, of course, in excellent trial of temper, while sometimes a bolder wight than usual would pursue his prize to the bottom and try to fasten upon it there, or some shy young damsel would cunningly shove the apple over to the side of the tub, and succeed by mother wit where masculine courage had failed. Then from the roof, suspended by a cord, hung a horizontal piece of wood, at one end of which was an apple, at the other a lighted tallow candle, and when the cord had been twisted up and set free again, causing the transverse piece of wood to whirl around, the competitor was invited to snatch with his mouth at the apple, failing to do which secured him a rap on the cheek from the glittering candle. There were all sorts of similar diversions going forward, the origin and symbolism of them little dreamt of by these light-hearted lads and lasses, when little Isabel Murray came up to the big, handsome, good-natured-looking forester from Glengorm. "Will you burn a nut with me, Hector?" she said kindly. "Indeed I will, Isabel, if you will take me for your sweetheart," said he in reply. "And now we will go to the fire, and see whether we are to be at peace and friendship all our lives." They went to the hearth. They put the 2 nuts among the blazing peats, and awaited the response of the oracle. Could any augury have been more auspicious? The 2 nuts lay together, burning steadily and quickly, a soft love flame, no angry sputtering, no sudden explosion and separation. "Now do you see that lamb of my heart?" said the tall forester, using a familiar Gaelic phrase. And no doubt the little lass was very highly pleased. However, at this moment up came Mrs. Murray, with the announcement that the children might continue at their games some time longer, but that the grown-up folk were wanted in the barn, where supper was waiting them. It was a joyous scene. The huge peat fire was blazing brightly. The impoverished chandelier was studded with candles. There were a couple of lamps on the long table, which were otherwise most sumptuously furnished, and when Hector McIntyre, in his capacity of piper, had played the people into the stirring strains of the Marchioness of Tweeddale's Delight, he put the pipes aside, and went and took the seat that had been reserved for him by the side of the fair-haired Nelly, who was very smartly dressed for this great occasion, as befitting the reigning beauty of the neighbourhood. "You'll be sorry that Flora is not here tonight," said the fair-haired damsel, rather saucily, to her brown-bearded companion. "And no one to take her place? I suppose there was no one in Sutherland good enough for you, Hector, that you must take up with the lass from Islay. And there is little need for you to dip your slave in the burn and hang it up to dry when you go to bed, so that the fire may show you your sweetheart. For well you know already who that is. Well, well, you will have no heart for the merrymaking tonight, for a lad that has a sweetheart away in the south has no heart for anything." "You'll just mind this, Nelly," said the forester, "not to carry your merrymaking too far this night. Alistair Ross," he continued, glancing down the table toward the huge, rough, red-bearded drover who was seated there, "is not the man to be made a fool of, and if that young fellow Semple does not take heed, he will find himself gripped by the waist some fine dark evening and flung into Loch Nava." "Oh, you are like all the rest, Hector," said the coquettish Nelly with some impatience. "Every one of you is jealous of Johnny Semple, because he is neatly dressed, and has good manners, and is civil-spoken." "What is he doing here at all?" said Hector with a frown. "Is it a fine thing to see a young man idling about a place with his hands in his pockets, just because his uncle is the landlord? If he has learned his fine manners in the towns, why does he not earn his living in the towns? He is no use here. "Oh, no," said Nelly, with a toss of her head. "Perhaps he's not much use on the hill. Perhaps he could not set traps and shoot hawks. But he knows all the new songs from the theatre, and he can dance more steps than anyone in Sutherland." "Well, this is what I am telling you, Nelly," her companion said with some firmness. "I do not know what there is between you and Alister Ross. If there is anything, as people say, then do not make him an angry man. Let Simple alone. An honest lass should beware of a town dandy like that." Here this private little conversation was interrupted by Mr. Murray, who rose at the head of the table and called upon the company to fill their glasses. He wished to drink with them, as they did not seem loath. When Hector and his pretty companion found opportunity to resume their talk, he discovered that Nelly was in quite a different mood. "Well, now it is a good thing, Hector, that everyone knows that you and Flora are to be married, for I can talk to you without Alistair getting red in the face with rage. And when we go out to pull the cabbage stalks, will you go with me? I know the way into the garden better than you, and we can both go blindfold if you will take my hand." "But what need is there for you to pull a cabbage stalk, lass?" said he. "Do you not know already what like your husband is to be?" Again the pretty Nelly tossed her head. "Who can tell what is to happen in the world?" "And maybe you would rather not pull a stalk that was tall and straight and strong. That would mean Alistair," said the companion, glancing at her suspiciously. "Maybe you would rather find you had got hold of a withered old stump with a lot of earth at the root, a decrepit old man with plenty of money in the bank. Or maybe you are wishing for one that is slim and supple and not so tall, for one that might mean Johnny Simple." "I am wishing to know who the man is to be, and that is all," said Nelly, with some affectation of being offended. "And what harm can there be in doing what everyone else is doing?" However, not all Nelly's blandishments and petulant coquetries could induce Hector McIntyre to take part in this appeal to the divinations of the Kailyard, for when, after supper, the lads and lasses went away blindfold to pull the castock that was to reveal to them the figure and circumstances of their future spouse, the big forester remained to have a quick smoke with the married keepers and shepherds who had no interest in such matters. It was noticed that he was unusually grave, he who was ordinarily one of the lightest of the light-hearted. Naturally, they put it down to the fact that among all the merrymaking and sweethearting and spying into the future of the young people, he alone had no companion, or rather not the companion whom he would have wished to have. For Flora, the young girl whom he was to marry, had left Invermoodal for the south in the preceding autumn, and when they had asked if Flora was quite well, and when he had answered, "Oh, yes," there was nothing further to be said. 2. Now, on All Hallows Eve, there is one form of incantation which is known to be extremely, nay, terribly potent when all others have failed. You go out by yourself, taking a handful of hemp seed with you. You get to a secluded place and begin to scatter the seed as you walk along the road. You say, "Hemp seed, I sow thee. Hemp seed, I sow thee. He who is to be my true love, appear now and show thee." And if you look furtively over your shoulder, you will behold the desired apparition following you. When Nelly came back from consulting the oracle of the Kailyard, it appeared that she had received what oracles generally vouchsafe, a doubtful answer. "What kind of castock did you pull, Nelly?" Hector asked of her. "Well," said she, "it is not much one way or the other. No, I cannot tell anything by it. But I am going out now to sow the hemp seed, Hector. I shall be far too frightened to look over my shoulder, and this is what I want you to do for me. You will stop at the door of the inn and hide yourself, and I will go up the road and sow the hemp seed, and if anything appears, you will see it. Will you do that, Hector? It is a clear night. You will be sure to see if there is anything." He did not seem in the mood for taking part in these superstitious observances, but he was good-natured, and eventually followed her to the door. The little walled garden in front of Invermoodal Inn is shaped like a horseshoe, the two ends of the semicircle touching the main highway at some distance apart. He saw Nelly go up toward the main road, and looked after her absently and without interest. Nay, he was so little thinking of his promised watch, that as she was some time over the sowing of the hemp seed, he left the shadow of the inn door and strolled away up the main road by the other fork of the semicircular drive. It was a beautiful, clear moonlit night. His thoughts were far away from the Halloween diversions. He was recalling other evenings long ago, when Clebrig as now seemed joining earth and heaven, and when there was no sound but the murmuring of the burns through the trackless heather. The highway up there was white before him. On the other side was a plantation of young firs, black as jet, Not even the cry of a startled bird broke this perfect stillness. The wide world of mountains and lochs and moor was plunged in sleep profound. All at once his pipe, that he happened to be holding in his hand, dropped to his feet. There before him in the white highway, and between him and the black belt of the firs, stood Flora Campbell, regarding him with eyes that said nothing, but only stared in a somewhat sad way, as it seemed. He was not paralyzed with terror at all. He had no time to ask himself what she was doing here, or how she had come here. Flora Campbell, standing there in the road, and looking at him in silence. And then the horror came when suddenly he saw that the white highway was empty. He began to shake and shiver as if with extremity of cold. He did not move. He could not move. He knew what had happened to him now. Flora Campbell's wraith had appeared to him. But with what message? The steady gaze of her eyes had told him nothing. If they were anything, they were mournful. Perhaps it was a token of farewell. Perhaps it was an intimation of death. Hardly knowing what he did, and trembling in every limb, he advanced a step or two, so that he could command the whole length of the highway. There was no sign of any living thing there. He could not recall how it was she first appeared. He could not tell in what manner she had gone away. He only knew that for a few moments before, Flora had been regarding him with steady plaintive eyes, and that now he was alone with this moonlit road and black plantation, and Clebrig rising far into the silent heavens. Then there arose in his heart a wild resolve that whatever this thing might portend, he must instantly make way for the south, to seek out Flora Campbell herself. She had something to say to him surely, though those mournful eyes conveyed no intelligible message. Nay, if she were dead, if this were but a mute farewell, must he not know? Dazed, bewildered, filled with terrible misgivings of he knew not what, he slowly went back to the inn. He had some vague instinct that he must ask Mr. Murray for the loan of a stick if he were to set out now to cross the leagues of wild and mountainous country that lie between Invermoudal and the sea. Mr. Murray, as it chanced, was at the door. "God's sakes, Hector, what is the matter with you?" he exclaimed in alarm, for there was a strange look in his face. "I have seen something this night," was the answer, spoken slowly and in an undertone. "Nonsense, nonsense," the innkeeper said. "The heads of the young people are filled with foolishness on Halloween, as every one knows. But you are not to be frightened by their stories." "It has naught to do with Halloween," said Hector, still with his eyes fixed on the ground, as if seeking to recall something. "Do you know what I have seen this night? I have seen the wraith of Flora Campbell. Aye, as clear as daylight." "I do not believe it, Hector," said Mr. Murray. "You have been hearing all those stories of the witches and fairies on Halloween until your own head has been turned. Why, where did you see the wraith?" "Up there in the road, and as clear as daylight, for that is the truth. It was Flora herself," the tall forester made answer, not argumentatively, but as merely stating a fact that he knew. "And did she come forward to you, or did she go away from you?" Mr. Murray asked curiously. I am not sure," Hector said after a little hesitation. "No, I could not say. Perhaps I was not thinking of her, but all at once I saw her between me and the plantation in the middle of the road, and for a moment I was not frightened. I thought it was Flora herself. Then she was gone." "For you know what they say, Hector," Mr. Murray continued. "When a wraith appears, it is to tell you of a great danger, and if it comes forward to you, then the danger is over. But if it goes away from you, the person is dead." "Aye, I've heard that too," Hector murmured, as if in sombre reverie. Then he looked up and said, "I am going away to the south." "Well, now, that is unfortunate, Hector," the good-natured innkeeper said to him, "for tomorrow the mail comes north, and you will have to wait till the next day for the mail going south, to take you to the lairg to catch the train." "I will not wait for the mail," answered the forester, who indeed knew little about travelling by railway. "Tomorrow is Wednesday. It is the day the big steamer starts from Loch Inver. Perhaps I may be in time." "Loch Inver!" the other exclaimed. "And how are you going to get to Loch Inver from here, Hector?" "Across the forest," was the simple reply. "Across the Ray forest and down by Loch Assynt. That will be a fearful journey through the night." "I cannot rest here," Hector said. "You will make some excuse for me to the lads and lasses. I will leave my pipes. Long Murdoch will do very well with them. And I will thank you to lend me a stick, Mr. Murray, for it will be a rough walk before I have done." Mr. Murray did more than that. He got his wife to make up a little packet of food, to which he added a flask of whisky, and these he took out for the young man, along with the shepherd's staff of stout hazel. "Goodbye, Hector," said he. "I hope you will find all well in the south." "I do not know about that," the forester answered in an absent sort of fashion, "but I must go and see. There will be no peace of mind for me. There would not be one moment's peace for me, otherwise, for who knows what Flora wanted to say to me." 3. It was an arduous task he had set before him. For 9 men out of 10 it would have been an impossible one. But this young forester's limbs knew not what fatigue was, and in his heart there burned a longing that could not be assuaged. Nor in ordinary circumstances would the loneliness of this night journey have mattered to him, but his nerves had been unstrung by the strange thing that had happened, and now, as he followed the shepherd's track that led away into the higher moorlands south of the Moudal river, he was conscious of some mysterious influence surrounding him that was of far more immediate concern than the mere number of miles, some 40 or 50, he had to accomplish before noon of the next day. Those vast solitudes into which he was penetrating were apparently quite voiceless and lifeless, and yet he felt as if they knew of his presence and were regarding him. A white stone on a dark heather-covered knoll would suddenly look like a human face, or again he would be startled by the moonlight shining on a small turn set among the black peat hogs. There was no moaning of the wind, but there was a distant murmuring of water. The rills were whispering to each other in the silence. As for the mountains, those lone sentinels, Ben Loyal and Ben Hope and Ben He, they also appeared to be looking down upon the desolate plain, but he did not heed them. They were too far away. It was the objects near him that seemed to know he was here, and to take sudden shapes as he went by. Soon he was without even a shepherd's track to guide him, but he knew the lay of the land, and he held on in a line that would avoid the lochs, the deeper burns, and the steep heights of Meal and Amare. The moonlight was of great help. Indeed, at this period of his long through-the-night tramp, he was chiefly engaged in trying to recall how it was he first became sensible that Flora Campbell's wraith appeared before him. He saw again, surely he would never forget to his dying day, the most insignificant feature of the scene, the stone wall of the garden, the white road, the wire fence of the other side, and the black plantation of spruce and pine. What had he been thinking about? Not about Nellie. She was some distance in another direction, busy with her charms and incantations. No, he could not tell. The sudden apparition had startled him out of all memory. But what he was most anxious to convince himself was that the phantom had come toward him, rather than gone away from him ere it disappeared. Mr. Murray's words had sunk deep, though he himself had been aware of the familiar superstition. But now all his endeavours to summon up an accurate recollection of what had taken place were of no avail. He knew not how he first became conscious that the wraith was there, Flora Campbell herself, as it seemed to him, nor how it was he suddenly found himself alone again. He had been terrified out of his senses. He had no power of observation left. This phantasm that looked so like a human being, that regarded him with pathetic eyes, that had some mysterious message to communicate, and yet was silent, had vanished as it had appeared. He could not tell how. The hours went by. The moon was sinking toward the western hills, and still he toiled on through his pathless waste, sometimes getting into treacherous swamps, again having to ford burns swollen by the recent rains. He was soaked through to the waist, but little he heeded that. His thoughts were of his steamer that was to leave Loch Hinward the next day. With the moon going down, darkness was slowly resuming her reign, and it became more difficult to make out the landmarks. But, at all events, the heavens remained clear, and he had the guidance of the stars. And still steadily and patiently and manfully he held on, getting across the streams that fed Loch Fiodag without much serious trouble, until eventually he struck the highway running northward from Loch Llyn, and knew that so far at least he was in the right direction. Leaving the Corrie Kinloch road again, he had once more to plunge into the trackless wilderness of rock and swamp and moorland, and the further he went through the black night, the less familiar was he with the country, for he had general knowledge, and what matters 6 miles one way or the other. If only the dawn could show him Ben More on his left, and always before him the silver-grey waters of Loch Assynt. He was less conscious now of the sinister influences of these lonely solitudes. His nervous apprehensions had given way before this dogged resolve to get out of the western shores in time to catch the steamer. All his attention was given to determining his course by the vague outlines of the higher hills. A wind had arisen, a cold, raw wind it was, but he cared nothing for that, unless indeed it should bring a smoke of rain and obliterate the landmarks altogether. How anxiously he prayed for the dawn. If this wind were to bring driving mists of rain, blotting out both earth and heaven, and limiting his visions to the space of moorland immediately surrounding him, where would be his guidance then? He could not grope his way along the slopes that lie beneath Loch Manscarrir, nor yet across the streams that fall into Loch Fionn. So all the more resolutely he held on, while as yet he could make out something of the land, dark against the tremulous stars. Again and again he turned his head and scanned the east with a curious mingling of impatience and hope and longing, and at last, to his unspeakable joy, he was able to convince himself that the horizon there was giving up faint signs of the coming dawn. He went forward with a new confidence, with a lighter step. The horror of these awful solitudes would disappear with the declaring day. Surely, when the world had grown white again, he would behold before him not this terrible black loneliness of mountains and mere, but the pleasant abodes of men and trees in the western ocean, and the red funnel steamer with its welcome smoke. The grey light in the east increased. He began to make out the features of the ground near him. He could tell a patch of heather from a deep hole, and could choose his way. The world seemed to broaden out. Everything, it is true, was as yet wan and spectral and ill-defined, but the silence was no longer awful. He had no further fear of the mist coming along to isolate him in the dark. By slow degrees, under the widening light of the sky, the various features of this wild country began to take more definite shape. Down there in the south lay the mighty mass of Ben More. On his right rose the sterile altitudes of Ben Uid. And at last, and quite suddenly, he came in view of the ruffled silvery surface of Loch Assynt, and the cottages of Incoadamph, and the grey ruins of the Ardrock Castle on the promontory jutting out into the lake. The worst of the sore fight with solitude and the night was over. He gained the road, and his long swinging stride now stood him in good stead. Loch Assynt was soon left behind. He followed the windings of the river inward. Finally he came in sight of the scattered little hamlet facing the western sea, with its bridge and its church and its pleasant woods and slopes, looking all so cheerful and homelike. And there also was the red-funnelled Klausmann that was to carry him away to the south. 4. That long and difficult struggle to get out to the western coast in time had so far demanded all his energy and attention. But now, in enforced idleness, as a heavy steamer ploughed her way through the blue waters of the Mink, his mind could go back upon what had happened the preceding night, and could also look forward with all sorts of dark and indefinite forebodings. He began to recall his first association with Flora Campbell, when she came to Ochnaver Lodge to help the old housekeeper there. He remembered how neat and trim she looked when she walked into the Stratey Free Church of a Sunday morning, and how shy she was when he got to know her well enough to talk a little with her when they met in their native tongue. Their courtship and engagement had the entire approval of Flora's master and mistress, for the old housekeeper at the lodge was now past work, and they proposed to install Hector's wife in her place, and give her a permanent situation. The wedding was to be in February or March. In April the young wife was to move into the lodge, to get it ready for the gentlemen coming up for the salmon fishing. When the fishing and shooting of the year was over, Flora could return to her husband's cottage, and merely look in at the lodge from time to time to light a fire or two and keep the place aired. Meanwhile, for this present winter, she had taken a situation in Oban. She was a West Highland girl, and had remained there until summoned away to Greenock by the serious illness of her sister. Such was the situation. But who could tell now what was to become of all those fair prospects and plans? Was it to bid a last farewell to them and to him that the young Highland girl had appeared, saying good-bye with such mournful eyes? The small parlour in his cottage, was she never to see the little adornments he had placed there, all for her sake? Well then, if what he feared had come true, no other woman should enter and take possession. There were dreams of Canada, of Cape Colony, of Australia in his brain, as he sat there with bent brow and heavy heart, taking hardly any heed of the new shores they were now nearing. This anguish of brooding became at length insupportable. In despair, he went to the stevedore, and said he would be glad to lend a hand with a cargo as soon as the steamer was alongside the quay in Stornoway harbour. And right hard he worked too, hour after hour, feeding the steam crane that was swinging crates and boxes over and down into the hold. The time passed more easily in this fashion. His chum was a good-natured young fellow, who seemed rather proud of his voice. At times he sang snatches of Gaelic songs. Mairi pin, meol, shuliach, Mary of the bewitching eyes, or Ait in Kaidil and Ribbin, where sleepest thou, dear maiden? They were familiar songs, but there was one still more familiar that woke strange echoes in his heart. For Flora Campbell was a West Country girl, and of course her favourite was the well-known Fiera Bata. I climbed the mountains and scanned the ocean, for thee, my boatman, with fond devotion. When shall I see thee? Today? Tomorrow? Oh, do not leave me in lonely sorrow. O my boatman, ma horo ailia. O my boatman, na horo ailia. O my boatman, na horo ailia. O my boatman, na horo ailia. 100 farewells to you, wherever you may be going. That is how it begins in the English, but it was the Gaelic phrases that haunted his brain, and brought him remembrance of Flora's crooning voice, and of a certain autumn evening, when he and she and some others went all the way down Loch Naver to Invermoodal, Flora and he sitting together in the stern of the boat, and all of them singing the Fiera Bata. The clansmen left Stornoway that same night, groaning and thundering through the darkness on a way to Skye. Hector did not go below into the forecabin. He remained on deck, watching the solitary ray of some distant lighthouse, or perhaps turning his gaze upon the great throbbing vault overhead, where Cassiopeia sat, throned upon her silver chair. More than once an aerolite shot swiftly across the clear heavens, leaving a faint radiance for a second or so in its wake, but he took no heed of these portents now. In other circumstances they might mean something, but now a more direct summons had come to him from the unknown world. The message had been delivered, though he had been unable to understand it, and he knew that what was to happen had now happened in that far town of Greenock. And all the slow hours went by, his impatience and longing increasing almost to despair. The dark loom of land in the south appeared to come no nearer. The monotonous throbbing of the screw seemed as if it were to go on forever, and as yet there was no sign of the dawn. But the new day, which promised to be quite insupportable in its tedium and in its fears, in reality brought him some distraction, and that was welcome enough. At Portree there came on board a middle-aged man of rather mean aspect, with broken nose, long upper lip, and curiously set small grey eyes. He carried a big bag, which apparently held all his belongings, and that he threw on to the luggage on the forward deck. "Where's this going to?" called the stevedore. "Sure, 'tis bound for the same place as myself," said the newcomer facetiously. "And that's Philadelphia, begob." "We don't call there," retorted the stevedore dryly. "And you'd better stick to your bundle if you want to see it at Greenock." And very soon it became apparent that the advent of this excited and voluble Irishman had brought new life into the steerage portion of the ship. He had had a glass or two of whisky. He talked to everybody within hearing about himself, his plans, his former experiences of the United States, and when gravelled for lack of matter, he would fall back on one invariable refrain: "Oh, begob, the Americans are the boys." And in especial were his confidences bestowed on Hector McIntyre, the shy and reserved Highlander, listening passively and without protest to Parry's wild asseverations. "Oh, the Americans are the devils, and no mistake," he exclaimed. "But let me tell you this, sir, that there's one there's cleverer than them, and that's the Irish boy, begob. Sure, they talk about the German vote, blather shine. 'Tis the Irish vote, sir, that's the master, and we've got the newspapers. And where would the Republicans or the Democrats be without us? Tell me that have ye place. In this old country the Irishman is a slave. In America he's the master, and every mother's son of them knows it. Begob, sir, that's the place for a man. This old country isn't fit for a pig to live in. America's the place. You might bet your life on it, sir." And suddenly it occurred to Hector that he might gain some information even from this blathering fool. His thoughts had been running much on emigration during those lonely hours he had passed. If what he dreaded had really taken place, he would return no more to the lone moorlands and hills and lakes of Sutherlandshire. He would put the wide Atlantic between himself and certain memories. For him it would be Soraid Slan, Litier Mograid, a long farewell to Finnery. But at present the Irishman would not be questioned. The outflowing of his eloquence was not to be stopped. He was now dealing with the various classes and various institutions of Great Britain, on each of which he bestowed the same epithet, that of bloody. The government, the newspaper editors, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, the clergy, the judges, the employers of labour, all were of the same ensanguined hue, and all were equally doomed to perdition as soon as Ireland had taken up a proper and inevitable position in America. Moreover, the tall and silent Highlander, as he sat and gazed upon the frothing creature, as if he were some strange phenomenon, some incomprehensible freak of nature, could not but see that the man was perfectly in earnest. "Look what they did to John Mitchell! Look at that now, John Mitchell!" Hector had unfortunately never heard of John Mitchell, so he could not say anything. "Dying by the roadside, John Mitchell, to be left to die by the roadside. Oh, think of that now. What do you say to that now? John Mitchell being left to die by the roadside." There were sudden tears in the deep sunken grey eyes, and the Irishman made no concealment as he wiped them away with his red cotton handkerchief. "Well, I'm very sorry," Hector McIntyre replied in answer to this appeal, whoever he was. "But what could they have done for the poor man?" "They could have given him a place," the other retorted with a sudden blaze of anger. "All that John Mitchell wanted was a place. But they, ensanguined, government, would they do it? No, sir. They let him die by the roadside. John Mitchell, to die by the roadside." "Well, I am thinking," said the forester slowly, as was his way when he had to talk in English, "that if the government was to give places to all them that would like a place, why the whole country would be in the public service, and there would be no one left to till the land. And do they give you a place when you go to America?" "Ah, be gobbed, sir," said the Irishman with a shrewd twinkle in his eye. "We get our share." Hector could not make out whether his new acquaintance had been to Portray to say good-bye to some friends before he crossed the Atlantic, or whether he had been engaged in the crofter agitation which was then attracting attention in Skye. On this latter subject, Parry discoursed with a vehement volubility and a gay and audacious ignorance, but here Hector was on his own ground, and had to interfere. "I am thinking you will not be knowing much about it," he observed with a calm frankness. "The great Highland clearances, they were not made for deer at all. They were not made for sportsmen at all. They were made for sheep, as many a landlord knows to cost this day, when he has the sheep farms on his lands and cannot get them let. And the deer forests, they are the worst land in a country where the best land is poor, and if they were to be cut up into crofts tomorrow, there is not one crofter in 20 would be able to earn his living, even if he was to get the croft for no rent at all. Oh yes, I am as sorry as anyone for the poor people when they increase in their families on such poor land. But what would be the use of giving them more peat hogs and rocks? Can a man live where neither deer nor sheep nor black cattle can live? And even the deer come down in the winter and go wandering for miles in search of a blade of bent grass. However, the Irishman could not accept these representations in any wise. He suspected this grave brown-bearded Highlander of being an accomplice and hireling of the ensanguined landlords, and he might have gone on to denounce him, or even to provoke an appeal to fisticuffs, which would have been manifestly imprudent, had it not suddenly occurred to him that they might go down below and have a glass of whisky together. Hector saw him disappear into the fore-cabin by himself, and was perhaps glad to be left alone. Steadily, the great steamer clove her way upward by the islands of Raasay and Scalpa, through the narrows of Kyle O'Kane and Kyle Rhea, past the lighthouse and opening to Isle Orsney, and down toward the wooded shores of Armadale. The day was fair and still. The sea was of an almost summer-like blue, save for long swaths of silver calm. The sun shone on the lower green slopes that seemed so strangely voiceless, and on the higher peaks and shoulders of the hills, where every corrie and watercourse was a thread of azure among the ethereal rose-greys of the far-reaching summits. Even the wild Ardnamurchan, the headland of the great waves, had not a flake of cloud clinging to its beetle cliffs, and the long smooth roll that came in from the outer ocean was almost imperceptible. Toward evening the clansmen sailed into Oban Bay. The world seemed all on fire, so far as sea and sky were concerned, but Kerrera lay in shadow, a cold and livid green, while between the crimson water and crimson heavens stood the distant mountains of Moll, and they had grown to be of a pale, clear, transparent rose-purple, so that they seemed a mere film thinner than any isinglass. 5. There was abundance of time for him to go ashore and make inquiries, but nothing had been heard of Flora Campbell since she had left. However, he managed to get the address of her sister, Mary Campbell, and with that in his possession he returned on board. Thereafter the monotonous voyage was resumed, away down by the long peninsula of Kentire, and round the mole up again through the estuary of the Clyde, until at 4 o'clock on the Friday afternoon the clansmen drew into Greenock Quay, and Hector McIntyre knew that within a few minutes he would learn what fate had in store for him for good or irretrievable ill. He found his way to the address that had been given him, a temperance hotel at which Mary Campbell was head laundry maid. But Mary Campbell was no longer there. She had been removed when she was taken ill, and as she would not go into a hospital, according to familiar prejudice amongst many of her class, lodgings had been found for her. Thither Hector went forthwith, to a slummy little by-street, where after many enquiries he found the land and the clothes that he sought. He ascended the grimy and dusky stone stairs. When he had nearly reached the top floor, he was met by a stout elderly man who had just shut a door behind him. "Is there one Mary Campbell living here?" he made bold to ask in English. "Aye, that there is," said the stranger, fixing keen eyes on him. "Are you come for news of her? I am the doctor." "Yes, yes," Hector said, but could say no more. His heart was beating like to choke him. He fixed his eyes on the doctor's face. "Ye'll be one of her Highland cousins, eh? Ye dinna look like a town-bred lad," said the brusque and burly doctor, with a sort of facetious good humour. Well, Mary is getting on right enough. You might as well go in and cheer her up a bit. The twa lasses dinna seem to have many friends." But Flora," said the forester, with his hungry, haggard eyes still watching every expression of the doctor's face. "The other one? Indeed, she has had the fever worse than her sister. I wasna sure one night but that she would go." McIntyre seemed to hear no more. Flora was alive, was within a few yards of him. He stood there quite dazed. His eyes were averted. He was breathing heavily. The doctor looked at him for a moment or two. "Maybe it's the sister you're anxious about," said he bluntly. "Well, she's no out of the wood yet, but she has a fair chance. What, man, what's the matter with ye? It's not such ill news." "No, no, it's very good news," Hector said in an undertone as if to himself. "I was fearing something. Can I see the lass? I was not hearing from her for a while." But he could not explain what had brought him hither. He instinctively knew that this south countryman would laugh at his Highland superstition, would say that his head had been stuffed full of Halloween nonsense, or that at most what he had imagined he had seen, and the fact that Flora Campbell had fallen seriously ill formed but a mere coincidence. "Oh yes, you can see her," the doctor said with rough good nature, "but I'll just go in beforehand to give her a bit of warning. You can talk to her sister for a minute or two. She's sitting up now, and soon she'll have to begin and nurse her sister, as her sister did her until she took the fever. Come away, lad. What's your name, did ye say?" "Hector McIntyre. Flora will know very well where I am from." The doctor knocked at the door, which was presently opened by a young girl, and while he left Hector to talk to the elder sister, who was lying propped up on a rude couch in a rather shabby little apartment, he himself went into an inner room. When he came out, he again looked at Hector curiously. "Now I understand why you were so anxious," said he with a familiar smile. "But how came ye to hear she was ill? She says she did not want ye to ken anything about it until she was on the high road to getting better." Hector did not answer him. He only looked toward the door that had been partially left open. "Go in, then," said the doctor, "and dinna stay over long, my lad, for she has little strength to waste in talking as yet." Timidly, like a schoolboy, this big strong man entered the sick room, and it was gently and on tiptoe, lest his heavily nailed boots should make any noise, that he went forward to the bedside. Flora lay there, pale and emaciated, but there was a smile of surprise and a welcome in the dark blue Highland eyes, and she tried to lift her wasted hand to meet his. What they had to say to each other was said in the Gaelic tongue. "It is sorry I am to say you like this," said he, sitting down and keeping her hand in his own, "but the doctor says you are now in a fair way to get better, and it is not from this town I am going until I take you with me, Flora, girl of my heart, the Sutherland air will be better for you than the Greenock air, and your sister Mary will come with you for a while, and both of you will take my little cottage, and Mrs. Matheson will give me a bed at Achnavel Lodge. I am sure Mr. Lennox would not object to that."
"But Hector, how did he know that I was ill?"
the sick girl said, and her eyes did not leave his eyes for a moment.
"I was not wishing you to know I was ill, to give you trouble, till I could write to you that I was better."
"How did I know?" he answered gravely. "It was you yourself who came to tell me."
"What is it that you say, Hector?"
she said, in some vague alarm. "On Halloween night," he continued, in the same serious, simple tones, "I was at Invermoodal. Perhaps I was not caring much for the diversions of the lads and lasses. I walked up the road by myself, and there your wraith appeared to me as clear as I see you now. When I went back and told Mr. Murray, he said, 'Did she come forward to you, Hector, or did she go away? She is in great danger. It is a warning, and if she went away from you, you will see her no more. But if she came forward, she is getting better. You will see Flora again.' I knew that myself, but I could not answer him, and my heart said to me that I must find out for myself, that I must go to seek you, and I set out that night and walked across the Ray forest to Loch Inver, and caught the steamer there. What I have been thinking since I left Loch Inver until this hour, I cannot tell you or to any one living."
"Hector,"
she asked,
"what night was Halloween night? I have not been thinking of such things."
"It was the night of Tuesday," he answered.
"And that,"
she said in a low voice,
"was the night that my fever took the turn.
Mary told me they did not expect me to be alive in the morning." "We will never speak of it again, Flora," said he, "for there are things that we do not understand." And then he added, "But now that I am in Greenock, it is in Greenock I mean to remain until I can take you away with me, and Mary too, for Sutherland air is better than Greenock air for a Highland lass. And sure I am that Mr. Lennox will not grudge me having a bed at Achnavel Lodge, and you will get familiar with the cottage, Flora, where I hope you will soon be mistress, and then there will be no more occasion for a great distance between you and me, or for the strange things that sometimes happen when people are separated the one from the other."
The Horror of the Heights by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The idea that the extraordinary narrative which has been called the Joyce Armstrong fragment is an elaborate practical joke evolved by some unknown person, cursed by a perverted and sinister sense of humor, has now been abandoned by all who have examined the matter. The most macabre and imaginative of plotters would hesitate before linking his morbid fancies with the unquestioned and tragic facts which reinforce the statement. Although the assertions contained in it are amazing and even monstrous, it is none the less forcing itself upon the general intelligence that they are true, and that we must readjust our ideas to the new situation. This world of ours appears to be separated by a slight and precarious margin of safety from a most singular and unexpected danger. I will endeavor in this narrative, which reproduces the original document in its necessarily somewhat fragmentary form, to lay before the reader the whole of the facts up to date, prefacing my statement by saying that, if there be any who doubt the narrative of Joyce Armstrong, there can be no question at all as to the facts concerning Lieutenant Myrtle, R.N., and Mr. Hay Connor, who undoubtedly met their end in the manner described. The Joyce Armstrong fragment was found in the field which is called Lower Haycock, lying 1 mile to the westward of the village of Withyham upon the Kent and Sussex border. It was on the 15th September last that an agricultural laborer, James Flynn, in the employment of Matthew Dodd, farmer of the Chauntry Farm, Withyham, perceived a briar pipe lying near the footpath which skirts the hedge in Lower Haycock. A few paces farther on he picked up a pair of broken binocular glasses. Finally, among some nettles in the ditch, he caught sight of a flat, canvas-backed book, which proved to be a notebook with detachable leaves, some of which had come loose and were fluttering along the base of the hedge. These he collected, but some, including the first, were never recovered, and leave a deplorable hiatus in this all-important statement. The notebook was taken by the laborer to his master, who in turn showed it to Dr. J. H. Atherton of Hartfield. This gentleman at once recognized the need for an expert examination, and the manuscript was forwarded to the Aero Club in London, where it now lies. The first 2 pages of the manuscript are missing. There is also one torn away at the end of the narrative, though none of these affect the general coherence of the story. It is conjectured that the missing opening is concerned with a record of Mr. Joyce Armstrong's qualifications as an aeronaut, which can be gathered from other sources and are admitted to be unsurpassed among the air pilots of England. For many years he has been looked upon as amongst the most daring and the most intellectual of flying men, a combination which has enabled him to both invent and test several new devices, including the common gyroscopic attachment, which is known by his name. The main body of the manuscript is written neatly in ink, but the last few lines are in pencil, and are so ragged as to be hardly legible, exactly, in fact, as they might be expected to appear if they were scribbled off hurriedly from the seat of a moving aeroplane. There are, it may be added, several stains, both on the last page and on the outside cover, which have been pronounced by the Home Office experts to be blood, probably human, and certainly mammalian. The fact that something closely resembling the organism of malaria was discovered in this blood, and that Joyce Armstrong is known to have suffered from intermittent fever, is a remarkable example of the new weapons which modern science has placed in the hands of our detectives. And now a word as to the personality of the author of this epoch-making statement. Joyce Armstrong, according to a few friends who really knew something of the man, was a poet and a dreamer, as well as a mechanic and an inventor. He was a man of considerable wealth, much of which he spent in the pursuit of his aeronautical hobby. He had 4 private aeroplanes in his hangar near Devizes, and is said to have made no fewer than 170 ascents in the course of last year. He was a retiring man with dark moods, in which he would avoid the society of his fellows. Captain Dangerfield, who knew him better than anyone, says that there were times when his eccentricity threatened to develop into something more serious. His habit of carrying a shotgun with him in his aeroplane was one manifestation of it. Another was the morbid effect which the fall of Lieutenant Myrtle had upon his mind. Myrtle, who was attempting the height record, fell from an altitude of something over 30,000 feet. Horrible to narrate, his head was entirely obliterated, though his body and limbs preserved their configuration. At every gathering of airmen, Joyce Armstrong, according to Dangerfield, would ask with an enigmatic smile, "And where, pray, is Myrtle's head?" On another occasion, after dinner, at the mess of the flying school in Salisbury Plain, he started a debate as to what will be the most permanent danger which airmen will have to encounter. Having listened to successful opinions as to air pockets, faulty construction, and overbanking, he ended by shrugging his shoulders and refusing to put forward his own views, though he gave the impression that they differed from any advanced by his companions. It is worth remarking that after his own complete disappearance it was found that his private affairs were arranged with a precision which may show that he had a strong premonition of disaster. With these essential explanations, I will now give the narrative exactly as it stands, beginning at page 3 of the blood-soaked notebook. Nevertheless, when I dined at Rheims with Cecilia and Gustav Raymond, I found that neither of them was aware of any particular danger in the higher layers of the atmosphere. I did not actually say what was in my thoughts, but I got so near to it that if they had any corresponding idea, they could not have failed to express it. But then they are 2 empty, vainglorious fellows with no thought beyond seeing their silly names in the newspaper. It is interesting to note that neither of them had ever been much beyond the 20,000-foot level, Of course, men have been higher than this both in balloons and in the ascent of mountains. It must be well above that point that the aeroplane enters the danger zone, always presuming that my premonitions are correct. Aeroplaning has been with us now for more than 20 years, and one might well ask, why should this peril be only revealing itself in our day? The answer is obvious. In the old days of weak engines, when 100-horsepower Gnome or Green was considered to be ample for every need, the flights were very restricted. Now that 300 horsepower is the rule rather than the exception, visits to the upper layers have become easier and more common. Some of us can remember how, in our youth, Garros made a worldwide reputation by attaining 19,000 feet, and it was considered a remarkable achievement to fly over the Alps. Our standard now has been immeasurably raised, and there are 25 high flights for one in former years. Many of them have been undertaken with impunity. The 30,000-foot level has been reached time after time with no discomfort beyond cold and asthma. What does this prove? A visitor might descend upon this planet 1,000 times and never see a tiger. Yet tigers exist, and if he chanced to come down in a jungle, he might be devoured. There are jungles of the upper air, and there are worse things than tigers which inhabit them. I believe in time they will map these jungles accurately out. Even at the present moment, I could name 2 of them. One of them lies over the Pau-Biarritz district in France. Another is just above my head as I write here in my house in Wiltshire. I rather think there is a third in the Hamburg-Wiesbaden district. It was the disappearance of the airmen that first set me thinking. Of course, everyone said that they had fallen into the sea, but that did not satisfy me at all. First, there was Verrier in France. His machine was found near Bayonne, but they never got his body. There was the case of Baxter also, who vanished, though his engine and some of the iron fixings were found in a wood in Leicestershire. In that case, Dr. Middleton, of Amesbury, who was watching the flight with a telescope, declares that just before the clouds obscured the view, he saw the machine, which was at an enormous height, suddenly rise perpendicularly upwards in a succession of jerks in a manner that he would have thought to be impossible. That was the last ever seen of Baxter. There was a correspondence in the papers, but it never led to anything. There were several other similar cases, and then there was the death of Hay Connor. What a cackle there was about an unsolved mystery of the air, and what columns in the halfpenny papers, and yet how little was ever done to get to the bottom of the business. He came down in a tremendous volplane from an unknown height. He never got off his machine and died in the pilot's seat. Died of what? Heart disease, says the doctors. Rubbish. Hay Connor's heart was as sound as mine is. What did Venables say? Venables was the only man who was at his side when he died. He said that he was shivering and looked like a man who had been badly scared. Died of fright, said Venables, but could not imagine what he was frightened about. Only said one word to Venables, which sounded like monstrous. He could make nothing of that at the inquest, but I could make something of it. Monsters. That was the last word of poor Harry Hay Connor, and he did die of fright, just as Venables thought. And then there was Myrtle's head. Do you really believe, does anyone really believe, that a man's head could be driven clean into his body by the force of a fall? Well, perhaps it may be possible, but I, for one, have never believed that it was so with Myrtle. And the grease upon his clothes, all slimy with grease, said someone at the inquest. Queer that no one got thinking after that. I did, but then I had been thinking for a good long time. I've made 3 ascents. How Dangerfield used to chaff me about my shotgun, but I've never been high enough. Now, with this new light Paul Verone machine and its 175 Robur, I should easily touch 30,000 tomorrow. I'll have a shot at the record. Maybe I'll have a shot at something else as well. Of course it's dangerous. If a fellow wants to avoid danger, he had best keep out of flying altogether, and subside finally into flannel slippers and a dressing gown. But I'll visit the air jungle tomorrow, and if there's anything there, I shall know it. If I return, I'll find myself a bit of a celebrity. If I don't, this notebook may explain what I am trying to do and how I lost my life in doing it. But no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please. I chose my Paul Verone monoplane for the job. There's nothing like a monoplane when real work is to be done. Beaumont found that out in the very early days. For one thing, it doesn't mind damp, and the weather looks as if we should be in the clouds all of the time. It's a bonny little model and answers my hand like a tender-mouthed horse. The engine is a 10-cylinder rotary roborer working up to 175. It has all the modern improvements: enclosed fuselage, high-curved landing skids, brakes, gyroscopic steadiers, and 3 speeds worked by an alteration of the angle of the planes upon the Venetian blind principle. I took a shotgun with me and a dozen cartridges filled with buckshot. You should have seen the face of Perkins, my old mechanic, when I directed him to put them in. I was dressed like an Arctic explorer, with 2 jerseys under my overalls, thick socks inside my padded boots, a storm cap with flaps, and my talc goggles. It was stifling outside the hangars, but I was going for the summit of the Himalayas, and had to dress for the part. Perkins knew there was something on, and implored me to take him with me. Perhaps I should if I were using the biplane, but a monoplane is a one-man show, if you want to get the last foot of life out of it. Of course I took an oxygen bag. The man who goes for the altitude record without one will either be frozen, or smothered, or both. I had a good look at the planes, the rudder bar, and the elevating lever before I got in. Everything was in order so far as I could see. Then I switched on my engine and found that she was running sweetly. When they let her go, she rose almost at once upon the lowest speed. I circled my home field once or twice just to warm her up, and then, with a wave to Perkins and the others, I flattened out my planes and put her on her highest. She skimmed like a swallow downwind for 8 or 10 miles until I turned her nose up a little, and she began to climb in a great spiral for the cloud bank above me. It's all important to rise slowly and adapt yourself to the pressure as you go. It was a close, warm day for an English September, and there was a hush and heaviness of impending rain. Now and then there came sudden puffs of wind from the southwest, one of them so gusty and unexpected that it caught me napping and turned me half round for an instant. I remember the time when gusts and whirls and air pockets used to be things of danger, before we learned to put an overmastering power into our engines. Just as I reached the cloud banks, with the altimeter marking 3,000, down came the rain. My word, how it poured! It drummed upon my wings and lashed against my face, blurring my glasses so that I could hardly see. I got down onto a low speed, for it was painful to travel against it. As I got higher, it became hail, and I had to turn tail to it. One of my cylinders was out of action. A dirty plug, I should imagine, but still I was rising steadily with plenty of power. After a bit the trouble passed, whatever it was, and I heard the full, deep-throated purr, the 10 singing as one. That's where the beauty of our modern silencers comes in. We can at last control our engines by ear. How they squeal and squeak and sob when they are in trouble! All those cries for help were wasted in the old days, when every sound was swallowed up by the monstrous racket of the machine. If only the early aviators could come back to see the beauty and perfection of the mechanism which have been bought at the cost of their lives. About 9:30 I was nearing the clouds. Down below me, all blurred and shadowed with rain, lay the vast expanse of Salisbury Plain. Half a dozen flying machines were doing hack work at the 1,000-foot level, looking like little black swallows against the green background. I dare say they were wondering what I was doing up in Cloudland. Suddenly a gray curtain drew across beneath me, and the wet folds of vapors were swirling round my face. It was clammily cold and miserable. But I was above the hailstorm, and that was something gained. The cloud was as dark and thick as a London fog. In my anxiety to get clear, I cocked her nose up until the automatic alarm bell rang, and I actually began to slide backwards. My sopped and dripping wings had made me heavier than I thought, but presently I was in lighter cloud and soon had cleared the first layer. There was a second, opal-colored and fleecy, at a great height above my head, a white, unbroken ceiling above, and a dark, unbroken floor below, with a monoplane laboring upward on a vast spiral between them. It is deadly lonely in these cloud spaces. Once a great flight of some small water bird went past me, flying very fast to the westward. The quick whir of their wings and their musical cry were cheery to my ear. I fancied that they were teal, but I am a wretched zoologist. Now that we humans have become birds, we must really learn to know our brethren by sight. The wind down beneath me whirled and swayed the broad cloud plain. Once a great eddy formed in it, a whirlpool of vapor, and through it, as down a funnel, I caught sight of the distant world. A large white biplane was passing at a vast depth beneath me. I fancy it was the morning mail service betwixt Bristol and London. Then the drift swirled inward again, and the great solitude was unbroken. Just after 10, I touched the lower edge of the upper cloud stratum. It consisted of fine diaphanous vapor drifting swiftly from the westward. The wind had been steadily rising all this time, and it was now blowing a sharp breeze, 28 an hour by my gauge. Already it was very cold, though my altimeter only marked 9,000. The engines were working beautifully, and we went droning steadily upwards. The cloud bank was thicker than I had expected, but at last it thinned out into a golden mist before me, and then in an instant I had shot out from it, and there was an unclouded sky and a brilliant sun above my head, all blue and gold above, all shining silver below, one vast, glimmering plain as far as my eyes could reach. It was 10 o'clock, and the barograph needle pointed to 12,800. Up I went, and up, my ears concentrated upon the deep purring of my motor, my eyes busy always with the watch, the revolution indicator, the petrol lever, and the oil pump. No wonder aviators are said to be a fearless race. With so many things to think of, there is no time to trouble about oneself. About this time, I noted how unreliable is the compass when above a certain height from the earth. At 15,000 feet, mine was pointing east and a point south. The sun and the wind gave me my true bearings. I had hoped to reach an eternal stillness in these high altitudes, but with every 1,000 feet of ascent, the gale grew stronger. My machine groaned and trembled in every joint and rivet as she faced it, and swept away like a sheet of paper when I banked her on the turn, skimming downwind at a greater pace, perhaps, than ever mortal man has moved. Yet I had always to turn again and tack into the wind's eye, for it was not merely the height record that I was after. By all my calculations, it was above Little Wiltshire that my air jungle lay, and all my labor might be lost if I struck the outer layers at some farther point. When I reached the 19,000-foot level, which was about midday, the wind was so severe that I looked with some anxiety to the stays of my wings, expecting momentarily to see them snap or slacken. I even cast loose the parachute behind me and fastened its hook onto the ring of my leathern belt so as to be ready for the worst. Now was the time when a bit of scant work by the mechanic was paid for by the life of the aeronaut. But she held together bravely. Every cord and strut was humming and vibrating like so many harp strings. But it was glorious to see how, for all the beating and buffeting, she was still the conqueror of nature and the mistress of the sky. There is surely something divine in man himself that he should rise so superior to the limitations which creation seemed to impose. Rise, too, by such unselfish heroic devotion as this air conquest has shown. Talk of human denigration! When has such a story as this been written in the annals of our race? These were the thoughts in my head as I climbed that monstrous inclined plane, with the wind sometimes beating in my face and sometimes whistling behind my ears, while the cloudland beneath me fell away to such a distance that the folds and hummocks of silver had all smoothed out into one flat, shining plain. But suddenly I had a horrible and unprecedented experience. I have known before what it is to be in what our neighbors have called a tourbillon, but never on such a scale as this. That huge sweeping river of wind of which I have spoken had, as it appears, whirlpools within it which were as monstrous as itself. Without a moment's warning, I was dragged suddenly into the heart of one. I spun round for a minute or two with such velocity that I almost lost my senses, and then fell suddenly, left wing foremost, down the vacuum funnel in the center. I dropped like a stone and lost nearly 1,000 feet. It was only my belt that kept me in my seat, and the shock and breathlessness left me hanging half insensible over the side of the fuselage. But I am always capable of a supreme effort. It is my one great merit as an aviator. I was conscious that the descent was slower. The whirlpool was a cone rather than a funnel, and I had come to the apex. With a terrific wrench throwing my weight all to one side, I leveled my planes and brought her head away from the wind. In an instant I had shot out of the eddies and was skimming down the sky. Then, shaken but victorious, I turned her nose up and began once more my steady grind on the upward spiral. I took a large sweep to avoid the danger spot of the whirlpool, and soon I was safely above it. Just after 1 o'clock I was 21,000 feet above sea level. To my great joy I had topped the gale, and with every 100 feet of ascent the air grew stiller. On the other hand, it was very cold, and I was conscious of that peculiar nausea that goes with the rarefaction of the air. For the first time I unscrewed the mouth of my oxygen bag and took an occasional whiff of the glorious gas. I could feel it running like a cordial through my veins, and I was exhilarated almost to the point of drunkenness. I shouted and sang as I soared upward into the cold, still outer world. It is very clear to me that the insensibility which came upon Glacier, and in a lesser degree upon Coxwell, when, in 1862, they ascended in a balloon to a height of 30,000 feet, was due to the extreme speed with which a perpendicular ascent is made. Doing it in an easy gradient, and accustomizing oneself to the lessened barometric pressure by slow degrees, there are no such dreadful symptoms. At the same great height I found that even without my oxygen inhaler I could breathe without undue distress. It was bitterly cold, however, and my thermometer was at 0 Fahrenheit. At 1:30 I was nearly 7 miles above the surface of the earth and still ascending steadily. I found, however, that the rarefied air was giving markedly less support to my planes, and that my angle of ascent had to be considerably lowered in consequence. It was already clear that even with my light weight and strong engine power, there was a point in front of me where I should be held. To make matters worse, one of my sparking plugs was in trouble again, and there was intermittent misfiring in the engine. My heart was heavy with the fear of failure. It was about this time that I had a most extraordinary experience. Something whizzed past me in a trail of smoke and exploded with a loud hissing sound, sending forth a cloud of steam. For the instant I could not imagine what had happened. Then I remembered that the earth is forever being bombarded by meteor stones, and would be hardly inhabitable were they not, in nearly every case, turned to vapor in the high outer layers of the atmosphere. Here is a new danger for the high-altitude man, for 2 others passed me when I was nearing the 40,000-foot mark. I cannot doubt that at the edge of the Earth's envelope, the risk would be a very real one. My barograph needle marked 41,300 when I became aware that I could go no further. Physically, the strain was not as yet greater than I could bear, but my machine had reached its limit. The attenuated air gave no firm support to the wings, and the least tilt developed into a side slip while she seemed sluggish on her controls. Possibly, had the engine been at its best, another 1,000 feet might have been within our capacity, but it was still misfiring, and 2 out of the 10 cylinders appeared to be out of action. If I had not already reached the zone for which I was searching, then I should never see it upon this journey. But was it not possible that I had attained it? Soaring in circles like a monstrous hawk upon the 40,000-foot level, I let the monoplane guide herself, and with my Mannheim glass I made a careful observation of my surroundings. The heavens were perfectly clear. There was no indication of those dangers which I had imagined. I have said that I was soaring in circles. It struck me suddenly that I would do well to take a wider sweep and open up a new air tract. If the hunter had entered an earth jungle, he would drive through it if he wished to find his game. My reasoning had led me to believe that the air jungle which I had imagined lay somewhere over Wiltshire. This should be to the south and to the west of me. I took my bearings from the sun, for the compass was hopeless and no trace of earth was to be seen, nothing but the distant silver cloud plain. However, I got my direction as best I might, and I kept her head straight to the mark. I reckoned that my petrol supply would not last more than another hour or so, but I could afford to use it to the last drop, since a single magnificent volplane could at any time take me to the earth. Suddenly I was aware of something new. The air in front of me had lost its crystal clearness. It was full of long, ragged wisps of something which I can only compare to very fine cigarette smoke. It hung about in wreaths and coils, turning and twisting slowly in the sunlight. As the monoplane shot through it, I was aware of a faint taste of oil upon my lips, and there was a greasy scum upon the woodwork of the machine. Some infinitely fine organic matter appeared to be suspended in the atmosphere. There was no life there. It was inchoate and diffuse, extending for many square miles and then fringing off into the void. No, it was not life, but might it not be the remnants of life? Above all, might it not be the food of life, of monstrous life, even as the humble grease of the ocean is food for the mighty whale? The thought was in my mind when my eyes looked upward, and I saw the most wonderful vision that man has ever seen. Can I hope to convey it to you even as I saw it myself last Thursday? Conceive a jellyfish, such as sails in our summer seas, bell-shaped and of enormous size, far larger, I should judge, than the dome of St. Paul's. It was of a light pink color, veiled with a delicate green, but the whole huge fabric so tenuous that it was but a fairy outline against the dark blue sky. It pulsated with a delicate and regular rhythm. From it there depended 2 long, drooping, green tentacles which swayed slowly backwards and forwards. This gorgeous vision passed gently with noiseless dignity over my head, as light and fragile as a soap bubble, and drifted upon its stately way. I half turned my monoplane that I might look after this beautiful creature, when, in a moment, I found myself amidst a perfect fleet of them, of all sizes, but none so large as the first. Some were quite small, but the majority about as big as an average balloon, and with much the same curvature at the top. There was in them a delicacy of texture and coloring which reminded me of the finest Venetian glass. Pale shades of pink and green were the prevailing tints, but all had a lovely iridescence where the sun shimmered through their dainty forms. Some hundreds of them drifted past me, a wonderful fairy squadron of strange, unknown argosies of the sky, creatures whose form and substance were so attuned to these pure heights that one could not conceive anything so delicate within actual sight or sound of the earth. But soon my attention was drawn to a new phenomenon, the serpents of the outer air. These were long, thin, fantastic coils of vapor-like material which turned and twisted with great speed, flying round and round at such a pace that the eyes could hardly follow them. Some of these ghost-like creatures were 20 or 30 feet long, but it was difficult to tell their girth, for their outline was so hazy that it seemed to fade away into the air around them. These air snakes were of a very light gray or smoke color, with some darker lines within, which gave the impression of a definite organism. One of them whisked past my very face, and I was conscious of a cold, clammy contact, but their composition was so unsubstantial that I could not connect them with any thought of physical danger, any more than the beautiful bell-line creatures which had preceded them. There was no more solidity in their frames than in the floating spume from a broken wave. But a more terrible experience was in store for me. Floating downward from a great height there came a purplish patch of vapor, small as I saw at first, but rapidly enlarging as it approached me, until it appeared to be hundreds of square feet in size. Though fashioned of some transparent, jelly-like substance, it was none the less of much more definite outline and solid consistence than anything which I had seen before. There were more traces, too, of a physical organization, especially two vast, shadowy, circular plates on either side, which may have been eyes, and a perfectly solid white projection between them, which was as curved and as cruel as the beak of a vulture. The whole aspect of this monster was formidable and threatening, and it kept changing its color from a very light mauve to a dark, angry purple, so thick that it cast a shadow as it drifted between my monoplane and the sun. On the upper curve of its huge body there were three great projections which I can only describe as enormous bubbles, and I was convinced as I looked at them that they were charged with some extremely light gas which served to buoy up the misshapen and semi-solid mass in the rarefied air. The creature moved swiftly along, keeping easy pace with the monoplane, and for 20 miles or more it formed my horrible escort, hovering over me like a bird of prey which is waiting to pounce. Its method of progression, done so swiftly that it was not easy to follow, was to throw out a long glutinous streamer in front of it, which in turn seemed to draw forward the rest of the writhing body. So elastic and gelatinous was it that never for 2 successive minutes was it the same shape, and yet each change made it more threatening and loathsome than the last. I knew that it meant mischief. Every purple flesh of its hideous body told me so. The vague, goggling eyes, which were turned always upon me, were cold and merciless in their viscid hatred. I dipped the nose of my monoplane downward to escape it. As I did so, as quick as a flash, there shot out a long tentacle from this mass of floating blubber, and it fell as light and sinuous as a whiplash across the front of my machine. There was a loud hiss as it lay for a moment across the hot engine, and it whisked itself into the air again while the huge flat body drew itself together as if in sudden pain. I dipped to a vol peak, but again a tentacle fell over the monoplane and was shorn off by the propeller as easily as it might have cut through a smoke wreath. A long, gliding, sticky, serpent-like coil came from behind and caught me round the waist, dragging me out of the fuselage. I tore at it, my fingers sinking into the smooth, glue-like surface, and for an instant I disengaged myself, but only to be caught round the boot by another coil, which gave me a jerk that tilted me almost onto my back. As I fell over, I blazed off both barrels of my gun, though indeed it was like attacking an elephant with a pea-shooter to imagine that any human weapon could cripple that mighty bulk. And yet I aimed better than I knew, for with a loud report, one of the great blisters upon the creature's back exploded with a puncture of the buckshot. It was very clear that my conjecture was right, and that these vast, clear bladders were distended with some lifting gas. For in an instant the huge, cloud-like body turned sideways, writhing desperately to find its balance, while the white beak snapped and gaped in horrible fury. But already I had shot away on the steepest glide that I dared to attempt, my engine still full on, the flying propeller and the force of gravity shooting me downwards like an aerolite. Far behind me I saw a dull, purplish smudge growing swiftly smaller and merging into the blue sky behind it. I was safe out of the deadly jungle of the outer air. Once out of danger, I throttled my engine, for nothing tears a machine to pieces quicker than running on full power from a height. It was a glorious spiral volplane from nearly 8 miles of altitude, first to the level of the silver cloud bank, then to that of the storm cloud beneath it, and finally, in the beating rain, to the surface of the earth. I saw the Bristol Channel beneath me as I broke from the clouds, but having some petrol in my tank, I got 20 miles inland before I found myself stranded in a field half a mile from the village of Ashcombe. There I got 6 tins of petrol from a passing motor car, and at 10 minutes past 6 that evening, I alighted gently in my own home meadow at Devizes, after such a journey as no mortal upon earth has ever yet taken, and lived to tell the tale. I have seen the beauty, and I have seen the horror of the heights, and greater beauty, or greater horror than that, is not within the ken of man. And now it is my plan to go once again before I give my results to the world. My reason for this is that I must surely have something to show by way of proof before I lay such a tale before my fellow men. It is true that others will soon follow and will confirm what I have said, and yet I should wish to carry conviction from the first. Those lovely iridescent bubbles of air should not be hard to capture. They drift slowly upon their way, and the swift monoplane could intercept their leisurely course. It is likely enough that they would dissolve in the heavier layers of the atmosphere, and that some small heap of amorphous jelly might be all that I should bring to earth with me. And yet something there would surely be by which I could substantiate my story. Yes, I will go, even if I run a risk by doing so. These purple horrors would not seem to be numerous. It is probable that I shall not see one. If I do, I shall dive at once. At the worst, there is always the shotgun and my knowledge. Here a page of the manuscript is unfortunately missing. On the next page is written, in large, straggling writing, 43,000 feet. I shall never see the earth again. They are beneath me, 3 of them. God help me, it's an awful way to die. Such in its entirety is the Joyce Armstrong statement. Of the man, nothing has since been seen. Pieces of his shattered monoplane have been picked up in the preserves of Mr. Bud Lushington upon the borders of Kent and Sussex, within a few miles of the spot where the notebook was discovered. If the unfortunate aviator's theory is correct that this air jungle, as he called it, existed only over the southwest of England, then it would seem that he had fled from it at the full speed of his monoplane, but had been overtaken and devoured by these horrible creatures at some spot in the outer atmosphere above the place where the grim relics were found. The picture of that monoplane skimming down the sky, with the nameless terrors flying as swiftly behind it, and cutting it off always from the earth while they gradually closed upon their victim, is one upon which a man who valued his sanity would prefer not to dwell. There are many, as I am aware, who still jeer at the facts which I have set down, but even they must admit that Joyce Armstrong has disappeared, and I would commend to them his own words. This notebook may explain what I am trying to do and how I lost my life in doing it, but no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please.
Reading by Matt Perard. The Ghost in Love by Unknown. Translated by George Soulier. On the 15th day of the first moon, in the second year of the period of renewed principles, the streets of the town of the eastern lake were thronged with people who were strolling about. At the setting of the sun, every shop was brightly lit up. Processions of people moved hither and thither. Strings of boys were carrying lanterns of every form and color. Whole families passed, every member of whom, young or old, small or big, was holding at the end of a thin bamboo the lighted image of a bird, an animal, or a flower. Richer ones, several together, were carrying enormous dragons whose luminous wings waved at every motion and whose glaring eyes rolled from right to left. It was the fete of the lanterns. A young man, clothed in a long pale green dress, allowed himself to be pushed about by the crowd. The passers-by bowed to him. "How is my Lord Li, the peaceful?" "The humble student thanks you. And you, how are you?" "Very well, thanks to your happy influence." "Does the precious student soon pass his second literary examination?" "In 2 months. Ignorant that I am idling instead of working." The fete was drawing to a close when the peaceful quitted the main street and went towards the east gate, where the house was to be found in which he lived alone. He went farther and farther. The moving lights were rarer. Ere long he only saw before him the fire of a white lantern decorated with 2 red peonies. The paper globe was swinging to the steps of a tiny girl, clothed in the blue linen that only slaves wore. The light, behind, showed the elegant silhouette of another woman, this one covered with a long jacket made in a rich pink silk edged with purple. As the student drew nearer, the belated walker turned round, showing an oval face and big long eyes, wherein shone a bright speck, cruel and mysterious. Li, the peaceful, slackened his pace, following the 2 strangers, whose small feet glided silently on the shining flagstones of the street. He was asking himself how he could begin a conversation, when the mistress turned round again, softly smiled, and in a low, rich voice said to him: "Is it not strange that in the advancing night we are following the same road?" "I owe it to the favor of heaven," he at once replied, "for I am returning to the east gate. Otherwise I should never have dared to follow you." The conversation, once begun, continued as they walked side by side. The student learned that the pretty walker was called Double Peony, that she was the daughter of Judge Hsu, that she lived out of the city in a garden planted with big trees, on the road to the lake. On arriving at his house, the peaceful insisted that his new friend should enter and take a cup of tea. She hesitated. Then the 2 young people pushed the door, crossed the small yard bordered right and left with walls covered with tiles, and disappeared in the house. The servant remained under the portal. Daylight was breaking when the young girl came out again, calling the servant, who was asleep. The next evening she came again, always accompanied by the slave bearing the white lantern with 2 red peonies. It was the same each day following. A neighbor who had watched these nocturnal visits was inquisitive enough to climb the wall which separated his yard from that of the lovers, and to wait, hidden, in the shade of the house. At the accustomed hour the street door, left ajar, opened to let in the visitors. Once in the courtyard, they were suddenly transformed. Their eyes became flaming and red, their faces grew pale, their teeth seemed to lengthen, an icy mist escaped from their lips. The neighbor did not see any more. Terrified, he let himself slide to the ground and ran to his inner room. The next morning he went to the student and told him what he had seen. The lover was paralyzed with fear. In order to reassure himself, he resolved to find out everything he could about his mistress. He at once went outside the ramparts, on the road to the lake, hoping to find the house of Judge Sue. But at the place he had been told of, there was no habitation. On the left, a fallow plain, sown with tombs, went up to the hills. On the right, cultivated fields extended as far as the lake. However, a small temple was hidden there under big trees. The student had given up all hope. He entered, notwithstanding, into the sacred enclosure, knowing that travelers stayed there sometimes for several weeks. In the first yard a bonze was passing in his red dress and shaven head. He stopped him. "Do you know Judge Sue? He has a daughter." "Judge Sue's daughter?" asked the priest, astonished. "Well, yes. But wait. I will show her to you." The peaceful felt his heart overflowing with joy. His beloved was living. He was going to see her by the light of day. He quickly followed his companion. Passing the first court, they crossed a threshold and found themselves in a yard planted with high pine trees and bordered by a low pavilion. The bonze, passing in first, pushed a door, and, turning round, said, "Here is Judge Sue's daughter." The others stopped, terrified. On a trestle a heavy black lacquered coffin bore this inscription in golden letters: "Coffin of double peony. Judge Sue's daughter." On the wall was an unfolded painting representing the little maid. A white lantern decorated with 2 red peonies was hung over it. "Yes, she has been there for the last 2 years. Her parents, according to the rite, are waiting for a favorable day to bury her." The student silently turned on his heel and went back, not deigning to reply to the mocking bow of the priest. Evening arrived. He locked himself in, and covering his head with his blankets, he waited. Sleep came to him only at daybreak. But he could not cease to think of her whom he no longer saw. His heart beat as if to burst. When, in the street, he perceived the silhouette of a woman which reminded him of his friend. At last he was incapable of containing himself any longer. One evening he stationed himself behind the door. After a few minutes there was a knock. He opened the door. It was only the little maid. "My mistress is in tears. Why do you never open the door? I come every evening. If you will follow me, perhaps she will forgive you." The peaceful, blinded by love, started at once, walking by the light of the white lantern. The next day the neighbors, seeing that the student's door was open, and that his house was empty, made a declaration to the governor of the town. The police made an inquest. They collected the evidence of several people who had been watching the nightly visitors the student had received. The bonze of the temple outside the city walls came to say what he knew. The chief of the police went to the road leading to the lake. He crossed the threshold of the little edifice, passed the first yard, and at last opened the door of the pavilion. Everything was in order, but under the lid of the heavy coffin one could see the corner of the long green dress of the student. In order to do away with evil influences, there was a solemn funeral. Ever since this time, on light, clear nights, the passers-by often meet the 2 lovers entwined together, slowly walking on the road which leads to the lake.